Tollbooth-episode 22. What a pleasant surprise to meet someone so nice, they all thought, and especially here. "I wonder if you could spare me a little of your time," he inquired politely, "and help with a few small jobs?"
"Why, of course,"
said the humbug cheerfully.
"Gladly,"
added Talk. "Yes, indeed," said Milo, who wondered for just a moment how it was possible for someone so agreeable to have a face with no features at all. "Splendid," he said happily, "for there are just 3 tasks. Firstly, I would like to move this pile from here to there," he explained, pointing to an enormous mound of fine sand. "But I'm afraid all I have is this tiny tweezers," and he gave them to Milo, who immediately began transporting 1 grain at a time. "Secondly, I would like to empty this well and fill the other, but I have no bucket, so you'll have to use this eyedropper," and he handed it to Talk, who undertook at once to carry 1 drop at a time from well to well. "And lastly, I must have a hole through this cliff, and here is a needle to dig it." The eager humbug quickly set to work picking at the solid granite wall. When they had all been safely started, the very pleasant man returned to the tree and, leaning against it once more, continued to stare vacantly down the trail, while Milo, Talk, and the humbug worked hour after 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 hour. Chapter 17. Unwelcoming Committee. The humbug whistled gaily at his work, for he was never as happy as when he had a job which required no thinking at all. After what seemed like days, he had dug a hole scarcely large enough for his thumb. Talk shuffled steadily back and forth with the dropper in his teeth, but the full well was still almost as full as when he began, and Milo's new pile of sand was hardly a pile at all. "How very strange," said Milo, without stopping for a moment. "I've been working steadily all this time, and I don't feel the slightest bit tired or hungry. I could go right on the same way forever." "Perhaps you will," the man agreed with a yawn. At least it sounded like a yawn. "Well, I wish I knew how long it was going to take," Milo whispered as the dog went by again.
"Why not use your magic staff and find out?"
replied Talk, as clearly as anyone could with an eyedropper in his mouth. Milo took the shiny pencil from his pocket and quickly calculated that at the rate they were working, it would take each of them 837 years to finish. "Pardon me," he said, tugging at the man's sleeve and holding up the sheet of figures for him to see, "but it's going to take 837 years to do these jobs." "Is that so?" replied the man, without even turning around. "Well, you'd better get on with it then." "But it hardly seems worthwhile," said Milo softly.
"Worthwhile?"
the man roared indignantly. "Well, all I meant was that perhaps it isn't too important," Milo repeated, trying not to be impolite.
"Of course it's not important," he snarled angrily. "I wouldn't have asked you to do it if I thought it was important."
And now, as he turned to face them, he didn't seem quite so pleasant.
"Well, then why bother?"
asked Talk, whose alarm suddenly began to ring.
"Because, my young friend," ones, he muttered sourly. What could be more important than doing unimportant things? If you stop to do enough of them, you'll never get to where you're going. He punctuated his last remark with a villainous laugh. "Then you must be," gasped Milo. "Quite correct," he shrieked triumphantly. "I am the terrible Trivium, demon of petty tasks and worthless jobs, ogre of wasted effort, and monster of habit." The humbug dropped his needle and stared in disbelief, while Milo and Talk began to back away slowly. "Don't try to leave," he ordered with a menacing sweep of his arm, "for there's so very much to do, and you still have over 800 years to go on the first job." "But why do only unimportant things?" asked Milo, who suddenly remembered how much time he spent each day doing them. "Think of all the trouble it saves," the man explained, and his face looked as if he'd be grinning an evil grin, if he could grin at all. "If you only do the easy and useless jobs, you'll never have to worry about the important ones, which are so difficult. You just won't have the time, for there's always something to do to keep you from what you really should be doing. And if it weren't for that dreadful magic staff, you'd never know how much time you were wasting." As he spoke, he tiptoed slowly toward them with his arms outstretched and continued to whisper in a soft, deceitful voice, "Now, do come and stay with me. We'll have so much fun together. There are things to fill and things to empty, things to take away and things to bring back, things to pick up and things to put down. And besides all that, we have pencils to sharpen, holes to dig, nails to straighten, stamps to lick, and ever so much more. Why, if you stay here, you'll never have to think again. And with a little practice, you can become a monster of habit too." They were all transfixed by the Trivium's soothing voice, but just as he was about to clutch them in his well-manicured fingers, a voice cried out, "Run! Run!" Milo, who thought it was Talk, turned suddenly and dashed up the trail. "Run! Run!" it shouted again, and this time Talk thought it was Milo and quickly followed him. "Run! Run!" it urged once more, and now the humbug, not caring who said it, ran desperately after his two friends, with the terrible Trivium close behind. "This way! This way!" the voice called again. They turned in its direction and scrambled up the difficult, slippery rocks, sliding back at each step almost as far as they'd gone forward. With a great effort and many helping paws from Talk, they reached the top of the ridge at last, but only 2 steps ahead of the furious Trivium. "Over here! Over here!" advised the voice, and without a moment's hesitation, they started through a puddle of sticky ooze, which quickly became ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then hip-deep, until finally they were struggling along through what felt very much like a waist-deep pool of peanut butter. The Trivium, who had discovered a mound of pebbles which needed counting, followed no more, but stood at the edge, shaking his fist, shouting horrible threats, and promising to rouse every demon in the mountains. "What a nasty fellow!" gasped Milo, who was having great difficulty just getting his legs to move. "I hope I never meet him again."
"I believe he stopped chasing us,"
said the bug, looking back over his shoulder.
"And it's not what behind that worries me,"
remarked Talk as they stepped from the sticky mess,
"but what's ahead."
"Keep going straight! Keep going straight!" counseled the voice as they continued to pick their way carefully along the new path. "Now step up! Now step up!" it recommended. And almost before they knew what had happened, they had all taken a step up and then plunged to the bottom of a deep, murky pit. "But he said up," Milo complained bitterly from where he lay sprawling.
"Well, I hope you didn't expect to get anywhere by listening to me," said the voice gleefully.
"We'll never get out of here,"
the humbug moaned, looking at the steep, smooth sides of the pit.
"That is quite an accurate evaluation of the situation," said the voice coldly.
"Well, then why did you help us at all?" shouted Milo angrily.
"Oh, I do as much for anybody," he replied. "Bad advice is my specialty. For, as you can plainly see, I'm the long-nosed, green-eyed, curly-haired, wide-mouthed, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, round-bodied, short-armed, bow-legged, big-footed monster. And if I do say so myself, one of the most frightening fiends in this whole wild wilderness. With me here, you wouldn't dare try to escape."
And with that, he shuffled to the edge of the pit and leered down at his helpless prisoners. Talk and the humbug turned away in fright. But Milo, who had learned by now that people are not always what they say they are, reached for his telescope and took a long look for himself. And there, at the rim of the hole, instead of what he'd expected, stood a small, furry creature with very worried eyes and a rather sheepish grin.